How many paragraphs you need?
So 3 questions. We read a lot about the sort of role of the Germany in causing the Euro crisis. So what should Germany have done to prevent the crisis? And the second question is, what should Germany do to minimize the crisis right now? And the third question is, you talk a lot about the sort of power dynamics shift between the private sector and the state. And I'm just wondering, what is your view if there was any sort of contributions or the big cause that was caused by the private actor in this crisis?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody could have done anything to avoid the crisis because it was, in fact, the result of both the larger economic crisis plus imbalances that existed in Europe, which were not Germany's fault. I think that, and a lot of people agree with this, that had the Europeans done in 2010 what we did in 2008 after the Lehman crisis, that is essentially nationalize all the banks, make them clean up their balance sheets, make them get on a firm footing, recapitalize them, and then send them out into the world again, that maybe the crisis wouldn't have been avoided, but it could have been ameliorated. This was not done, as I said earlier, because the Europeans are simply paralyzed. They cannot take those kind of decisions. And there are a whole lot of reasons for it. But they simply don't have the understanding of markets. They don't have the sense of political balance among each other. They don't have a sense of vision of what they're needing to do. The European Union is still very much a sort of a post-war recovery program. And it may sound silly to say that 65 years after the war, but they're still in it. And I mentioned this discussion I took part in 10 days ago. And I tried to talk about these exact things. I put forward an agenda just like I did today. And they came back and they said, well, that's interesting, but don't forget we don't have a war. They are so deeply ingrained with the fear that if they take too many aggressive steps, especially the Germans, that they could again be in a war. And I've written articles about this saying the worst thing that they're doing is telling their population that they're bad. All Europeans think they're bad people because their leaderships tell them if they don't do what their leadership wants in the European Union, they're raising the danger of war again. And that is the key sort of poison pill which is in the European situation right now. And for the euro, when it came time, and there were some people like Mr. Schäuble, who's the finance minister of Germany, he wanted to set up immediately a sort of a European IMF, which was heavily capitalized, which would have, so to speak, taken over, I don't mean it that way, but which have adopted the banks, cleaned them up, and then hopefully sent everybody back on their way. But the political leadership of Europe simply wasn't ready to do it. And so it's nobody's fault. It's, there's a whole school in the United States, and I actually played a role in this. I'll tell you this anecdote because it fits in here. When the euro was being thought up, devised in the early 1990s after the Maastricht Treaty, most experts in the United States, and to this day, thought it was a mistake because it wouldn't work. Just because you have Germany and Greece and Portugal and France, and it just won't work. And they said so. And there's a professor at Harvard, Martin Feldstein, who had been an economic advisor to President Nixon, who wrote an article warning the Europeans that if they did this, they were endangering having a war. He thought he did that because he thought it would get their attention, which it did. Made them very mad. But the fact is that after 20 years, the exact goals that they thought they were going to achieve with the euro, which was to have economic stability, to have a harmonious development between the countries, to keep Germany under control so it wouldn't be too strong. Each one of them has not, in fact, been achieved. Exactly the opposite has happened. Germany is now the most powerful country in the EU. The anger, The insults going across between countries are getting worse, and Europe is anything but economically stable. Now, in the spring of 1997, the euro was being ready to be agreed somehow. And Mr. Summers, who was Treasury Secretary, said to me, and I knew him because of Bosnia, which I'll come to in a moment. And he said, I just talked with Alan Greenspan, and we're going to go out and tell the Europeans, don't do the euro. And here's now where you're going to have a bad impression of diplomats. But I was a classic diplomat, and I said, oh, no, you can't do that. That'll make the Europeans mad. And you know, we can't do that. So they said, okay, if you're so smart, you go over there and you convince me we shouldn't do it. So I went over to Europe and I talked with the people in finance ministries and parliaments and things like that. And I told them that we just thought the whole thing was nonsense and that our people wanted to come out and say that it was nonsense. And they said, well, you know, you can do what you want, except all you're going to do is make us even more determined to do it. Besides that, we won't cooperate anymore. Besides that, the dollar will probably collapse, et cetera, et cetera. So I went back and I told them all this, and they said, well, all right, maybe they're right. So we concocted this statement, which was, which I have somewhere in my files. Larry Summers quoted this. It was exactly my talking point. The United States is following carefully the development of the euro. We think this is a very important step. We think it is a matter for the Europeans and it's not appropriate for us to comment on. How about that? How about that for diplomats, right? Take that. And Greenspan sort of said that, but then at the end he couldn't help himself and he said, but I still think it's going to fail. So, you know, I don't know if he's right or wrong, but the reason I knew Larry Summers, I'm actually proud of this, and I'm thinking of writing an article on this, because these people don't know how to set up currencies, but I do, because I set up a currency, and it's still functioning. The convertible marca of Bosnia-Herzegovina was set up by me and Lipton, who is now the deputy head of the IMF. We set this thing up, and it has a currency board, and it has governors. It has an anchor, which is the D-mark, not the euro. And the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina hate each other even more than the Europeans hate each other. And the things work perfectly for 15 years. So you can do it. But to finish your question, nobody's at fault here. This is simply I think the Europeans should have taken a different course, but I also know that they simply, constitutionally, so to speak, in their hearts, couldn't do it. They think, by the way, and if you haven't read it, take a look at the reports of Merkel's speech at the Davos forum yesterday. She was bombed by everybody. IMF, Bob Zoellick, now there's a pleasant thought, all these people telling her that she was wrong, but she believes she's right. I can tell you, I've talked to her about it. I've had this discussion with her. And she says, you just don't understand. We Europeans have to do it this way. And, you know, in the end, maybe they're going to be right. Nobody thinks they will be, but maybe they will be. Because they have no other way of dealing with each other other than through this very slow, almost molasses-like process. That's the only way they know how to work. Because if they don't do it that way, they're afraid that their whole house is going to fall apart. Now, I personally think that this is one of the reasons that the European Union, as we now see it, isn't going to last that long, because these networks and these markets I've been talking about are just going to blow it apart. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will somehow hang in there and make it work. But your question is very good, because it's not possible to assign blame. It's just the way things are. It's the combination of the crisis, which started, after all, in the United States, but was spread very rapidly to Europe. It was partially European banks who were under, because we had been living in a very low interest rate environment, were looking for return, And they thought that buying this low-grade sovereign debt was the way to do it. When you talk to the bankers and say, why did you do it? They're very honest with you. They will say, because we knew we would be bailed out. Because in Europe, nobody ever loses. In the European Union, it has to always function. So there is never a time when somebody says, this didn't work. They always instead come up with a new agreement which makes it better. But they never say the old agreement failed. There is something called the European Innovation Plan, which was designed in 2005 or 6, and it was called Europe 2010. Well, by 2010, they took a look at it, and they figured out they hadn't done anything. And so, this is true. And so overnight, you could see it in the documents. Yesterday it was 2010, now it's 2020. And you can be pretty sure that it'll be 2030. Again, it sounds a little bit sarcastic, but that's the way it works. And I'm afraid that these developments I'm talking about aren't going to allow this to happen. Now, of course, we can talk about a US Congress which spends 3 months talking about something or other, debt ceiling increase, and has the same sense of immobility. So we're not that much better off. And again, that's why I think that our structures and our politicians have a fairly rude awakening ahead of them.
We have time for a couple more questions.
No more.
Yes.
I look at this like European efficiency problem, the American efficiency problem, what perhaps I'm being naive here, but I assume to be a Chinese efficiency problem in terms of a large state which has to
Right.
markets eventually going to accept that? I mean, I say this kind of as a business student. Markets are going to accept that states are slow, and rather than needing a state to adjust to the market will actually have to adjust to these states.
No, it'll be the other way around. There's a whole other category here we could talk about, but what is happening with these markets is a democratization of information and a democratization of policies. That's what I was talking about with regulation. The regulators don't know what to regulate anymore. And the Chinese are not going to be able to keep the internet under control. They're petrified at it right now. My favorite example, it was a true example recently, almost every country in the world, in fact there's a company in England, I don't know if people know this, there's a company in England which franchises these American Idol kind of programs. In Germany it's called Germany Seeks a Superstar. And every country has one something like this, and the Chinese had one. And the Chinese government, after about 6 months, took it off the air because they were worried about the implications of the voting for winners. The idea that you could actually vote democratically and openly for somebody was too much for them. This is a true story. This isn't going to work. And, but on the other hand, you were talking about state capitalism. I mean, I have actually great sympathy for Chinese leadership, even though much of their behavior is not very good. Because if you look at the job that they have to try to keep that country together and to try to keep it developing and to try to build enough industry and enough this and that, they're making numerous mistakes, and these mistakes are going to come home to roost. But, you know, and I'm very much in favor of everybody, Google and everybody penetrating as much as they can. But, you know, think of the alternative. Do we really want China to blow apart? No, we don't want China to blow apart. So a part of this, that's why I come back to my concept of network behavior. Keeping the networks in balance is going to be a very big thing. And if the United States could simply learn that the goal of our foreign policy ought to be able to keep networks in balance, that would be a major, major step forward. I'm not sure we will learn it, but maybe we'll learn it the hard way. So.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kornblum. It was so nice. Let's have 2 announcements before we go. The first is that tomorrow at noon we're going to do a panel with Ambassador Kornblum on the European debt crisis, so we can answer more of your research paper questions in more detail if you'd like to. That will be Ambassador Kornblum, myself, Professor Martin Rhodes, and also Professor Joe Japil from Boulder. And then the second thing I want to do, I want to thank a couple of people who helped us put this event together tonight, particularly Erica Fine and also Daniel Green. You guys were enormously helpful. I would have thrown myself under a bus if it hadn't been for you in preparation for this thing, but I really appreciate your help. So please give them a round of applause as well. You should please help yourself to a glass of wine, and there's some food back there. We'll be here for the next hour, so if you have any additional questions for the ambassador, I'm sure he'd be delighted to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, it's a little different, but I warned you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a great pleasure.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
That was really good.
Well,
Really good.
So you're not the old Europeanist anymore.
no, because yeah, I'm global. Europe is.
It's Hamburg now.
No, Germany is going to be the center of something new. And
Do they believe that?
no, they don't know that yet.
Does anyone? Anyone?
Oh, lots of people do. Oh, yeah, sure.
Like who?
Well, like the logistics people. Like the railroads.
How about Schäuble is still working?
Oh, let me.
Thank you. We'd like to get a photograph of you.
Oh, I gotta have the provost with me. I gotta get a little legitimation. Oh yeah, get rid of that palm. Thank you. They're not there yet.
Yeah.
They're still. If you would have been at that evening I was at, I almost despaired. I've tried over the years to be calm about this, but I almost despaired that evening.
But Schäuble has been there for ages. He's got to be one of the old dogs.
Oh yeah, he is. Yeah.
And he was out there calling for an IMF.
Yeah.
So he knew.
No, Schäuble is first, he's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And secondly, he's not somebody who is burdened by too much old things, shall we say. He thinks about what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So he was ready to do it.